Hey everyone, good morning. I hope your day is starting off just as fantastic as it can. There's less than 1 week to go until the Canadian federal election. And in fact, the advanced polls are already open. So let's go through some of the general numbers on various sources of information, starting here with the CBC poll tracker. They have the Liberals out in front. This is national popular vote. The Liberals at 43.3%, the Conservatives at 38.4%. And the rest of the parties, it doesn't matter. Scrolling down here to see CBC's seat projection. They project the Liberals winning 195 seats and the Conservatives winning 122 seats. The NDP being crushed with 5 seats and the Bloc Québécois 20 seats. The magic number to beat to form a majority government is 172 seats, which is half the seats in the House of Commons. This is CBC's projection based on weighting that they apply to some polls. But let's look at some other sources of information. The Poly market, the betting market, which asks who will be Canada's next Prime Minister, has Mark Carney at 76% and Pierre Poilievre at 24%. And they break down the nation as follows, depicting the whole country here in colors as to which party will get the most seats, not necessarily how many seats, but for instance, you can look at the bars there. The red, heavily favored in Ontario to win most seats. A province that's a little bit closer. The Liberals slightly favored, this is the betting market, Poly market, of getting the most seats in British Columbia. Alberta heavily favored to vote Conservative. Nothing surprising in these bets. Newfoundland with its 7 seats is heavily favored to go mainly Liberal. Nova Scotia Liberal. New Brunswick Liberal. This one here, Quebec, this is a big one. In the Poly market, the sliver for Conservatives is so narrow, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. Now, Poly market summarizes all their information in this summary page, and you can look at this graph here. Back in January, the Conservatives, led by Poilievre, had on the betting market 88-90% chance of victory, and you can see how that has changed and narrowed and now widened in the other direction. And right now, as we mentioned, Carney and the Liberals 76%, Poilievre 24% in the betting markets. Their seat projection is not as dire as the CBC. They're projecting now the Liberals with 165 seats. I shouldn't say they're projecting. There's no one projecting. This is based on the betting markets. The Conservatives at 144 seats. This would mean the Liberals form a minority government, and they would have to make a deal with either the Bloc or the NDP, which, according to the betting markets, are looking like 22 seats for the Bloc and 11 seats for the NDP. Another interesting website which summarizes pretty much all the polls and does a really good job of displaying them countrywide, and they actually even show riding per riding polls and use all that information to make these projections. This is Canada 338 Federal Election Projections, and that's the map here. Their total projection is Liberals 188 seats, which would form a majority. Conservatives 125 seats, the NDP way down at 7. And if you look at the map of Canada, it's pretty much all red except for the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan here. But let me bring your attention to one of the most important provinces, which I made a video about a couple of weeks ago, where I asked the question, can Quebec be single-handedly responsible for choosing the next Prime Minister? And the answer was yes. And if we look at Quebec here, and we click the province of Quebec here and we look at the totals for each party, the Liberals are polling at 42% in Quebec, the Bloc Québécois at 25%. They only run in Quebec. The Conservatives at 23% and the NDP at 6%. But when you translate that into seat projections for Quebec, look at this right behind my head here. The Liberals, 43 seats, and the range 35 to 54 seats. The Bloc 22 seats, and the Conservatives 12. That's projected. Based on these percentages for popular vote, and you'll notice that the Bloc at 25 and the Conservatives at 23 are very close in Quebec, but the seat total projections are double for the Bloc. And that's because the Bloc vote is very concentrated on some ridings that they will probably win, whereas the Conservatives are more spread out throughout the province. And when you add up all the seat projections based on these polls, you'll notice that the Liberals are projected to win heavily in the Maritime and Eastern provinces. And in Quebec, if the Liberals win 43 seats and the Conservatives 12, the election is pretty much over. It's going to be over by the time we finish counting the votes in Quebec, because it will be such an insurmountable lead that the next province then is going to be Ontario. And the latest seat projections in Ontario, even though the polling shows Liberals at 47% and Conservatives at 40%, which is not a big spread, the story here is that the NDP has collapsed so far. They used to poll at 20 to 25%, but now they're at around 8%. And it seems like all of their support has shifted to the Liberals. The seat projections in Ontario, look at the range here, 62 to 94, or 81 seats on average in Ontario, compared to the Conservatives' 38. By the time they finish counting the votes in Ontario, the election's over. And how are the Liberals amassing such a huge amount of seats in Ontario? It's not complicated, guys. When you start scrolling through the ridings in Ontario, and Ontario is the most populous province in Canada, you get to an area like this: Brampton Centre, Brampton Chicago-Sea Park, Brampton East, Brampton North, Brampton South, Brampton West. Brampton is what Ontario would consider a small city in the outskirts of Toronto. It's part of the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. Just the city of Brampton, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 seats. Brampton is like a Newfoundland, all right? Keep scrolling down here. Mississauga Centre, Mississauga East, Mississauga Erin Mills, Mississauga Lakeshore, Mississauga Malton, Mississauga Streetville. Mississauga is another city on the west side of Toronto. Liberal, 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 liberal. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Mississauga is like New Brunswick. Scroll a little further and you got Scarborough Agincourt, Scarborough Centre, Scarborough Rogue Park, Scarborough North, Scarborough West, Scarborough. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Scarboroughs, which is a city to the east side of Toronto. It's basically all attached, but it's not Toronto, it's the GTA. Scarborough is like half of Manitoba. So it's looking grim for the Conservatives based on the polling and the betting markets at this time, with less than 1 week to go. And now the question is, guys, because I'm going to start talking about strategy and what I believe is a massive, massive blunder by the Conservative Party. And they've made this massive blunder now 4 times in a row. Now look at the map here. Alberta and Saskatchewan are blue, and the rest of the country is pretty much red. Now, if you consider what the parties campaigned on and their strategies, before Justin Trudeau resigned, it was the Conservative Party's strategy to run against him and his record and the carbon tax. Okay? But now Justin Trudeau is gone and the carbon tax is gone. For the first week of this campaign, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives continued to run against Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax. They switched their slogan from, after 9 years of Justin Trudeau, everything's terrible and we have to have a carbon tax election now. They switched it to, after 9 years of Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, everything's broken and we have to have a carbon tax election now. Even though the first thing Mark Carney did when he became Prime Minister was to assign the carbon tax to 0. The Conservatives insisted on continuing to run against the carbon tax. At first their strategy was, well, he's being sneaky. He hasn't actually removed the carbon tax. He's just set it to 0, and he's only going to do that temporarily until after the election. But then April 1st came around, and gas prices dropped about 20 cents a litre all across Canada. And everyone that went to the gas station to fill up their car noticed how much cheaper gas was, and they thought, oh, maybe the carbon tax is gone. Then the Conservatives changed their strategy to say, well, he's only going to drop the carbon tax temporarily, and then he's going to put it back in after he gets elected. And they did this for about a week or two at the beginning of the campaign. And it just wasn't polling right. It wasn't resonating with most of the country. Here's one of my key observations that I made throughout the campaign, and it really came to light in the debates. And at the beginning of the campaign, I said that the secret weapon for the Conservatives, because the position they found themselves in was they could no longer run against Trudeau, they could no longer run against the carbon tax. They would have a much harder time running against Carney. And their secret weapon would be the debates. That Pierre Poilievre had to perform really well in the debates. And they just had the debates, mainly the English debate being the one that's most viewed in Canada. And I watched that debate start to finish. And I got to say that Pierre Poilievre, and now guys, I'm not giving you an opinion of who you should vote for or what ideology you should believe. I'm just going to talk about the strategy, okay? In that debate, each leader had a chance to speak for about 20 minutes. They had a timer there, and the moderator made sure that he allowed each of the leaders, there were 4 of them, the NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the Bloc leader, each got to speak for about 20 minutes. Pierre Poilievre used a large portion of his 20 minutes speaking about pipelines. He spoke about pipelines, and he spoke about pipelines and pipelines, and then he spoke about wanting to repeal Bill C-69, which he calls the No More Pipelines Bill. It's not a No More Pipelines Bill. Only in an alternate universe where you believe in strange realities, probably in Alberta and Saskatchewan, do people believe that Bill B-69 is a No More Pipelines Bill. It's actually a regulatory bill that sets out the parameters in which you can approve large projects in Canada and how you have to do environmental assessments and consultations. He must have mentioned the word pipelines. I didn't count it, but if you watch that debate, he might have mentioned the word pipelines more often than I have mentioned them myself in this video. And I guess that resonates with Alberta and Saskatchewan because Alberta wants pipelines. That's all they want. That's all they talk about in Alberta is pipeline. So if you were trying to win seats in Alberta, it's a good idea to talk about pipelines. But I've got to point out, strategy-wise, for the Conservatives, you already had all the seats in Alberta and Saskatchewan sewn up. You did not have to campaign and focus your effort on trying to solidify the vote in Alberta and Saskatchewan. There are 37 seats in Alberta and 14 seats in Saskatchewan. How many is that in total? That's 51 seats. There's 51 seats in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And I would propose that if the Conservatives never campaigned in Alberta, never mentioned the word pipeline, didn't spend any money on any advertising or any campaigning in Alberta, and they just went to Walmart and they bought 51 Barbies, swimsuit Barbie, driving in a car Barbie, gym Barbie, camping Barbie. They bought 51 different types of Barbies, and those were the 51 candidates in Alberta and Saskatchewan. The Conservatives could win about 49 or 48 of those seats. But instead, he chose to talk about pipelines in that debate ad nauseum. Now, the rest of the country, the topic of pipelines plays out differently. And it's funny because the leader of the Bloc, Yves-François Blanchet, actually spoke about it in the debate, Quebec's position about pipelines, and he spoke very thoughtfully about a specific pipeline. A pipeline that has just been built in Canada. A pipeline that the Liberal government bought and paid for and spent $40 billion to build, a pipeline that travels from Edmonton to Vancouver, which carries about 1 million barrels a day to the West Coast, which was built using $40 billion of taxpayers' money. And the leader of the Bloc from Quebec pointed out and spoke about this and said, well, the pipeline that the Liberals built cost $40 billion. And of that $40 billion, taxpayers' money, Quebec represents about 25% of the population of Canada. So about $8 to $10 billion of the cost of that pipeline was paid for by the people of Quebec. And that pipeline only benefits Alberta. And he spoke about it as being the biggest single transfer to one particular province in Canadian history. And he's correct. And for some reason, the Conservative leader, Poilievre, was just going on about pipelines. Now, the people of Quebec are not stupid. They talk about this stuff and they're very astute and understand this stuff. And the point of view in Quebec is, well, we've just paid $10 billion to help Alberta build a pipeline. That's the reality in Quebec. And it's no surprise that the polling now indicates that the Conservatives will pretty much lose this election once the votes are counted in Quebec. Now, the Liberals are also shrewd and tactical, and they understand that rhetoric about building more pipelines is not necessarily going to play out well in Quebec and Ontario. And even though they spent $40 billion of taxpayers' money to build the pipeline themselves, they're not really eager to take credit for it. And Mark Carney never mentioned the word pipeline in the debate because he knows, even though it was the correct thing to do, to build a pipeline for the national interest and the national economy, he didn't want to stand up and take credit for it because he knows it will hurt him in Quebec and Ontario. Very shrewd. Whereas Poilievre is just continually pushing the issue of pipelines as if he has no other thing to talk about, and it just will not resonate in Quebec. Like, the regions of Canada are very different. Now, I'm going to be very simple here, and you might think it's silly, but it's true. If you want to win votes in Atlantic Canada, where the unemployment rate is high and people fish, you have to talk about unemployment insurance and fish. All right? If you want to win votes in Quebec, Quebec is the most green province and the most focused on renewable energy and the most focused on culture. If you want to win votes in Quebec, you have to talk about culture and you have to talk about green energy. All right? If you want to win votes in Ontario, the most densely populated province where the biggest cities are, in Toronto and the GTA, where housing is a big issue, where rent is a big issue, where prices are a big issue, you have to talk about housing and rent and prices. If you want to win votes in Alberta, where the number one issue for the past 20, 25 years has been pipelines, then you talk about pipelines. And this is exactly what's going to happen. The Conservatives have talked about pipelines all campaign, and they will win Alberta. But they will not win the Atlantic provinces because they haven't talked about fish. And they will not win votes in Quebec because they haven't talked about Quebec's distinctness and culture, and they haven't talked about renewable energy. And they're not going to win votes in Ontario because they haven't talked about the issues in the cities in Ontario. It seems to me that Conservatives are incapable of winning federal elections in Canada. Another issue that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives spent a whole day talking about on the campaign trail recently was this. Poilievre promises to scrap single-use plastics ban and bring back the plastic straw. He gave a speech where he was very serious and talking about this in a way that, as if he was trying to protect us from evil, where he said in a very morbid tone, the Liberal plastics ban is not about the environment, it's about cost and control. This isn't about science, it's about symbolism. They aren't about saving the planet, they're about punishing all of us to make themselves feel good. They're about punishing all of us and controlling us and not allowing us to use plastic straws. Now, that day on the campaign trail, how many votes in Quebec did that translate into? You know what? It probably really rallied the troops in Alberta. I'm sure there's a majority of people in Alberta that are just cheering that they can get their plastic straws back. But do you think it actually gained any votes in Quebec? The other big blunder that the Conservatives made is this. If you guys notice this, if you're in Canada and you're listening to the radio or the news, you hear a lot of stories about Mark Carney and his statements and things he's been saying on the campaign trail. And you hear a lot about Jagmeet Singh. But you don't hear very much about what Pierre Poilievre's doing or what he's saying. Why is that? Is it a conspiracy? No, it's not a conspiracy. It is another huge blunder that the Conservatives made. And I'll explain it very briefly here. The way campaigns work in Canada, it's not like the United States. You can't spend an unlimited amount of money, and the campaign doesn't last 3 years, okay? In Canada, campaigns are short. This one is like 4 weeks, and there's a limit to what the parties can spend. And it's a small limit. It's the same type of rules that they have in the UK. So parties raise their own money, but then they have a cap on how much they can spend. So a lot of the media coverage that the parties get is very important, and they get it in this way. Each party has a plane that their leader travels the country and campaigns with. Well, actually, the Liberals and the Conservatives have a plane. The New Democrats have a bus. But the point is, each party invites reporters. They allow representatives from the different news agencies in Canada to travel with them the whole campaign. So as each party makes a campaign stop and gets off their plane and plans something and gives a speech, all the reporters from the various news agencies are with them through the whole campaign. There'll be 4 or 5 reporters following Mark Carney around on his plane. They get to sit in the back, and Mark Carney and his strategists sit in the front. And when they land and they're going to do an event, they let the reporters know what the event's going to be, and they go out there and start filming them, and they report. And the guy gets on TV every day without fail, every time he has an event for the whole campaign. And the same with the New Democrats. But for some reason, the Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, is not allowing reporters to travel with him on the campaign trail. And his reason is that he does not believe that the media portrays his party favorably. He thinks that he's being portrayed in a negative way. And so his solution is to not allow any reporters to travel with him on the campaign trail. So when his plane lands somewhere and he's going to do an event, he walks out there to do an event, and I'm sure his strategist has probably phoned ahead to some of the local networks saying, oh, we're going to be at this place and Pierre is going to give a speech on this topic. And you have a few local smaller news agencies that may or may not show up, and some of the big national news agencies, they don't have an assigned representative following him around on the campaign trail. So what's happening is there's a void of news coming out of Poilievre's campaign. He's traveling around campaigning and no one knows about it. It's not getting on the news. Whereas Mark Carney and Jagmeet Singh are filling that void because they have national reporters following them around. And it's the Conservatives' own decision. They wanted this. All of the national networks want to travel with all the parties. But the Conservatives have said, no, you're not allowed to. Well, okay, you're not allowed to, and your message is not getting out. Except for that campaign stop where Poilievre gave that really morbid speech about the Liberals are trying to control us by forcing us not to use straws. That got on national coverage. So he can't control the narrative because he doesn't have the reporters there with him. When you have them there with you, you can go to the back of the plane and say, okay, we want you to start filming because I'm going to make a statement about such and such. And it gets out right away. He's handicapped himself. Just another massive blunder. It seems like every Conservative alive in Canada is trying to make the federal Conservative Party lose this election, including Daniel Smith here, the Premier of Alberta, who has been recently talking about having a post-election referendum to discuss separation if the Conservatives should lose. And the Liberals are actually using her words against her, and they're gaining some traction in Edmonton and Calgary. If we go back to the map of Canada and click on Alberta here, you'll see that the Conservatives are polling very strongly at 59%, the Liberals at 28%. But the seat projection has the Liberals potentially winning 4 seats. And when you look at what seats might be in play, let me bring your attention to one particular seat called Calgary Confederation, which is an inner city seat just north of the river in Calgary, which has gone Conservative in countless past elections, which is now a toss-up. And if we click that, we see a summary of the latest polling just within that riding, and it has the Conservatives at 45%, plus or minus 8%, and the Liberals at 44%. These are the results in this riding of the past 2 elections. In 2019, the Conservatives won 55% of the vote. The Liberals won 22%. In 2021, the Conservatives dropped to 45%. The Liberals won 27%. Recent polling in this is 45 to 44. Most of the NDP support, which has dropped from 17.7 to 5, has gone to the Liberals. And I have a friend who happens to live in the Calgary Confederation riding, and he sent me this. This is some of the material that's being dropped off door to door in that riding. This is how the Liberals are campaigning. We must fight for Confederation, and they have a picture of a scowling Daniel Smith, who is, pipelines, 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 versus Mark Carney. This is how they're campaigning in the federal election in the riding of Calgary Confederation. Daniel Smith isn't even running in the election, but she's opened her mouth so often and spewed her rhetoric that she is now actually the poster child that the Liberals are running against. This particular seat could go either way, but if the Liberals win 4 seats in Alberta, it'll be a disaster for the Conservatives. So let me summarize by talking about strategy again. And remember, I'm not trying to tell you who to vote for or what ideology you should have. But as far as a strategy perspective, you will not win elections in Canada by talking about pipelines, right? And the Conservatives just can't get this through their head. They cannot figure out how to win elections. If you want to build pipelines, if that's something you really want to do, What you have to do is win a national election first. Once you've won the election, then you can try as hard as you want to build pipelines however you want. You can try to encourage private companies to build it. You could buy a pipeline and build it yourself like the Liberals did. You could do whatever you want once you win. But if all you do during the campaign is talk about pipelines, you're not going to win Quebec, and you probably won't win Ontario. All right? The Liberals, a party who actually built a pipeline, is not campaigning on pipelines, and they never have campaigned on pipelines because they know, strategically speaking here, guys, think about this. The Liberals actually spent $40 billion of taxpayers' money to build a pipeline, and they know that even though they have done that, they will just not get rewarded for it. So they're not talking about it at all. They know that they will get punished for it in Quebec and Ontario, so they're just not saying anything about it. But if they win and they feel it's in the national interest to build a Canada East-West pipeline, for example, they probably would do it. If the Conservatives want to have any chance of winning elections federally in Canada, they're going to have to learn. One of their leaders, Brian Mulroney, one of the Conservatives' great leaders, said this: "You will not win a federal election in Canada from the outside in. You have to win from the inside out." And what he meant was you have to win from Quebec and Ontario out. You have to win Quebec and Ontario first and then work your way out. And what the Conservatives have been trying to do in this election and for the past 4 elections is they're trying to win an election from Alberta out. And they'll never win that way. They will never, it just will not work, because that just does not resonate with the rest of the country. And if we go back to this page, which is a nice colorful representation of the popular vote for each party in this election, you can see the Conservatives around 38%. That is about the level of popular vote that they received when they formed 2 back-to-back majority governments with their leader Stephen Harper about a decade ago. In fact, I think it's a little bit higher. I think they won 2 elections with Stephen Harper with about 37% of the popular vote. It seems to be their maximum. The difference now is that the Liberals are higher than that at the expense of the New Democratic Party and the Bloc. It seems like some votes have shifted from the Bloc and the New Democrats to the Liberals strategically, because Bloc supporters and New Democratic supporters hate the Conservatives so much that they'd rather turn their back on their preferred party to help the Liberals win. That's how poorly the Conservatives have positioned themselves nationally, and that's how poorly they've projected themselves to the whole population of the country. They are simply focusing themselves on their base and on their stronghold in Alberta. They've done a terrible job of campaigning or resonating with any of the rest of the country, in particular Quebec, Ontario, and the Atlantic provinces. And if they lose, if the numbers stay like this and they lose, they'll have no one but themselves to blame. I think Pierre Poilievre will have to resign. I think it will go down as one of the biggest disasters in political history of anywhere. If you think about it, really, a month before the election was called, the Conservatives had a 27-point lead in the polls, and the Liberals were projected to come in 3rd. All right, now look at the numbers. These are just numbers, these are just polls, these are just Polymarkets, but that's where it stands right now. We've got less than 1 week to go. I'll probably do one more video the day before the election and just take a snapshot of what the projected seat totals and the popular vote percentages are the day before, and then we can check with reality the day after the election. And remember, despite everything you've heard in this video, and I've tried to just present information and give my opinion on, I think, just the very poor strategy that the Conservatives have used in this election. The only thing that matters at the end of the day, the most important poll, is the election polls, and after they count the ballots on October 28th. Leave some comments, guys. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.